Today I'd like to talk about autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease now affects the large majority of the population. To understand autoimmune disease, we need to go back in time. Bacteria were the first living forms on the earth. We go back about 3.5 billion years. Initially, prokaryote cells were the only life form, small bacteria. These prokaryote cells are basically cells that have no membrane organelles in them. For instance, mitochondria. Mitochondria, or the nucleus, are covered in eukaryote cells. There are only two types of cells, prokaryote and eukaryote. So what happened with the prokaryote cells? They sort of reigned supreme for about 3 billion years. This is before plants. Plants only came along 500 million years ago, before insects 350 million years ago. And obviously humans are probably about 5 million years, our early hominids. And modern man, us, is probably 50,000 years. The prokaryote cells, interestingly, have genetic material, but it's in the cytoplasm of the cell, as opposed to the eukaryote cell, which is much more plentiful and has membranes around the organelles, like the nucleus. Most of our genetic information is in the nucleus. And the mitochondria really evolved from prokaryotic cells. In the distant past, Lynn Margulis, in the 60s, when she was at Harvard, basically put forth the theory of the endosymbiotic relationship, what and how mitochondria had actually evolved from these early prokaryote cells. The mitochondria essentially made all life on Earth possible. Somewhere in this distant part, the eukaryote, prokaryote cells got together, and it was decided the one would make and look for food, and the other, the mitochondria, would make energy. And that is essentially how things have evolved. Now, in addition to the mitochondria, which make 88 pounds of ATP, the energy, adenosine triphosphate, is the energy currency of our bodies. In addition to this amazing fact, obviously it gets recycled. In addition to that, it turns out mitochondria are the key signaling molecules in the whole body. What has this got to do with autoimmune disease? Quite simply, there has been a disruption in our relationship between the mitochondria and our microbiome. Remember, humans are only 10% human. We've got about 30 trillion human cells and 300 trillion bacteria, viruses, and protozoa, most of whom live in our gut. Here's the big problem. We know that people with autoimmune disease have a leaky gut. In other words, the gut is hypopermeable. And what happens when these tight junctions that should be keeping the gut nicely together, they become defective? We essentially get molecules and certain bacteria to come through the gut into our bloodstream. And what happens? Our immune system, recognizing this as a foreign invader, mounts a large inflammatory response. So this is critically important because most of the disease, not just autoimmune disease, but probably many other chronic diseases, heart attacks, strokes, cancer, Alzheimer's, etc., is probably all related to this leaky gut. The gut lining with eukaryote cells and the mitochondria are very influenced by this ecology of all our bugs, our so-called microbiome. Depending on there are over 10,000 species, at least, of these bacteria in our gut. The current understanding is that when there is a disruption in our bacteria, our microbiome, this is what leads to the leaky gut and all the inflammatory disease that we see. Now, what causes a leaky gut? There are at least 20 different causes, and I'm not going to enumerate them all. Obviously, artificial sweeteners are very toxic to the gut. Our diet is the major thing, and I'm going to concentrate probably on just one or two, but the other issues are obviously GMO foods. The lipopolysaccharide, which is the covering of gram-negative bacteria, is an absolute major inflammatory cause of and a producer of a lot of this chronic disease. Microplastics recently emerged. It turns out that we are probably swallowing a credit card of plastic into our bodies every single week. But let me get to the two major causes that I do want to mention. First of all, our modern diet. Professor Michael Murphy from Cambridge in the UK wrote a very important paper earlier this year in February. And basically what he suggested is that we have disrupted this relationship between our microbiome and our mitochondria. Mostly, he believes, because of the awful, particularly here in America, the tremendous increase in sugars, grains, toxic seed oils, together with all these other issues. For instance, Roundup that's sprayed on all the wheat, all these non-nutritive artificial sweeteners, alcohol, the plethora of drugs, NSAIDs, all the anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen, PPIs, protein pump inhibitors for gastric reflux, etc. These are all devastating. This 3 billion year evolution of our microbiome. A second major one is antibiotics. Antibiotics, believe it or not, have only been around since the 1940s. In addition, non-sort of organic meat, farmed fish, milk, and dairy products, even sanitizers and hand wash material, cesarean sections, which have increased tremendously, these all impact our microbiome tremendously. We had no idea how the widespread use of all these antibiotics, which are even in our drinking water, we have no idea how it has impacted and is responsible in a large part for this leaky gut. The other problem is many patients that I've seen have been to 5 or 6 doctors with very vague symptoms. Things like various abdominal pain, constipation, fatigue, brain fog, strange eczematous reactions in their skin. Many of these people have not been diagnosed. In the past, the ANA test was used and is the most widely used diagnostic to looking for autoimmune disease. Unfortunately, there are a lot of false positives, and it's not always present. Here at Eternity Medicine, there are two very important tests we do to diagnose autoimmune disease. One is a wheat zoomer test, which we can absolutely see if your gut is leaky. In pretty much 100% of people, we can diagnose that. The second test, which is very important, is the multiplex autoantibody test, which is far more sensitive than the ANA test. So what do we do at Eternity Medicine for autoimmune disease? Obviously, there are 20 different serious gut disruptors. So we are, obviously gluten is also tremendously toxic, and particularly all our wheat now, as you know, is sprayed here in America with Roundup. In Europe, Roundup is banned. Roundup is actually a carcinogen, but it somehow has a major detrimental effect on our gut. So here at with autoimmune disease here at Eternity, first of all, we want to diagnose you, and then we want to treat you by eliminating and restoring the gut flora, which will markedly decrease and hopefully heal you from your autoimmune disease.